This is The Law Show on CL 650. Now back to the show.
Hey, and welcome to The Law Show. I'm Zach Spencer, and today we've had a very fascinating show. We've covered so much stuff. We've talked about Americans wanting to move north because of the election in the U.S. We've talked about refugees and some personal stories. We've talked about permanent resident cards and travel, and we're going to pick up on that. And our guests today are from MKS in downtown Vancouver and Yaletown. Gordon Maynard and Rudy Kischer are here today, the experts on this stuff. So, Gordon, you mentioned before the break there's problems with the permanent resident card, and you were telling me the permanent resident card is a recent invention. What did you used to do when you were a resident of Canada but not a citizen?
PR cards were a creature of the 2002 changes to the Immigration Act. They actually had a grace period then. They came into place in about 2003, 2004. Before that, before 2002, when you became a permanent resident, you were given about an 8.5 by 14 piece of paper called a record of landing, an IMM 1000. And that was your proof that you were a permanent resident.
You would carry that when you traveled?
Yep. You also had
like this.
you also had a stamp in your passport, but of course passports get tired and changed, and so that stamp goes away. But that IMM 1000 was your document. There were lots of problems with the IMM 1000. Well, two major problems with the IMM 1000. One, it was made out of paper and it was cumbersome. Two, it could be counterfeitted.
Forged,
There was no photo on it.
Right.
No photo, yeah. It could be counterfeited. It didn't have any of the security features like our bills have and stuff like that. It was an old school document. And thirdly, it lasted forever. So they wanted to come up with a document.
There was no end date to it, right?
No end date to it. Yeah. And they wanted something, they wanted two things. They wanted something that was more secure, but they also wanted something that had an expiry date on it. And that, to my mind, this is the cleverest thing that the government did in the changes to the Immigration Act.
Why did they want that?
They wanted an opportunity to review how you were behaving as a permanent resident.
It's not a bad thing.
Not a bad thing.
No.
Under the old law, when you had the big piece of paper, you were required to, you could be a permanent resident as long as you didn't abandon your status in Canada.
What does that mean?
Well, under the old law, that was the problem. Nobody was sure what it meant. People would leave Canada and go away to school, go away to work, go away across overseas for whatever reasons. They might be away 10 years, but when they came back, the government would say, "Are you abandoning?" They say, "No, my kids are still here, my wife is still here, my property is here, I'm going to come back." They didn't have any way of effectively using that abandonment procedure. So when they wrote the new law, they did two things. They put in a 2-year out of 5 rule that said the permanent residents must be in Canada for 2 years out of every 5.
Is that a cumulative number?
Yes.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be in a string of 730 days or whatever it is. It can be cumulative in the 5-year period. But they also gave you a PR card that expires every 5 years. Now, when your card expires, it isn't that you stop being a permanent resident. You just don't have a card anymore. Like when your passport expires, you don't cease to be a citizen. You just have to go out and renew it. So having an expiring card meant that you had to make an application to renew your card. And when you made that application, it was a condition of the application that you had to show that you were living in Canada for the 2 years out of 5. So it was an enforcement tool, a tool to enforce the residency obligation. Very clever, very clever.
I would say as a Canadian citizen that I don't think that's such a bad thing.
I don't think the problem is...
It's not a bad thing.
It's not a problem with having the card. The problem is...
renewing it.
Government is an inefficient... CIC, when people talk about how the problems with Citizenship and Immigration Canada, I always remind them that, bureaucrats tend to, care about two things, people paying taxes and people voting. Well, people dealing with immigration, if they're immigrants, they're permanent residents and they're not voting it, they don't vote, right? And if they're people that are traveling a lot or haven't paid taxes, they're not paying taxes. And the amount of power they have on the system is very little. And what happens is this area, the Auditor General's review on Citizenship and Immigration Canada a couple of years ago said it's the last department that doesn't have any service standards. Like most people, in most departments, you're trying to run something, you say our service standard is we're going to renew your card in 60 days, right? If it's a straightforward one, right? So now we have clients that have come up with this nightmare where they've been here. So it's not someone who's traveling a lot, the executive that goes back and forth, or somebody who's got a business overseas and really isn't here that much, and the government's got to look. We have clients that have lived here, gone to school here, paid their taxes here, kids are in school here. They are applying for a PR card, and it's taking them 6 months. So for that 6 months
or more,
they're sick. And then what happens is, if they fill out the reams of forms themselves and they make a mistake someplace,
back to the bottom, yeah.
They get to a second pile. No, not back to the bottom, and it gets sent to Vancouver. We're sending you for secondary review. So you know how long that takes? I called the office up here in Vancouver. They have 1,000 application backlog. You know how many people they have processing that? 10.
Come on.
It's a year backlog. So now you're 18 months out. You can't travel.
Wow.
It's absolutely, so there's not a problem with having the card. The problem is the government is not dealing with it efficiently.
So they don't. Is it easier then to just get the ETA?
No, you're not eligible for an ETA.
Oh, it's a vicious cycle.
Well, you can't get it because you're a permanent resident. You have to be a foreign national.
The ETA is only for people who are foreigners, right? Temporary
So
entry.
is there any workaround?
Yes, there is. Well, the government, when they built the system...
That's where you guys come in.
You got to pay for that. We don't give that information free over the...
the government put in place a system that was supposed to accommodate this. And that is that if you're a permanent resident outside of Canada, let's say your PR card is expired, you've got it in process, and you have to travel. Mm-hmm. You have to travel. So you go traveling. Now
somebody passes away and you've got to go.
Exactly. Or you have an ill parent abroad or what have you. So while you're abroad, if you want to get on a plane to come back to Canada, you need to get a PR travel document. Mm-hmm. And you can apply to a consulate for that. But consulates are not like McDonald's. No. You don't walk in, pay your $1.35 and get a cheeseburger. No. And the process of applying for that travel document was really intended to be an enforcement process. Let's catch these people who are overseas. So you have to file this application, put it in. Now you're at the mercy of an officer in terms of their timing and in terms of their willingness to issue a travel document to get back to Canada. This is what people are frustrated with.
Well, and then it gets a step worse because people have applied for their PR card. So they've put all this documentation in when they applied for the PR card. Now they're going to the travel document. Well, the government has all that information. I shouldn't have to repeat everything. So I'm not going to put in all my tax. They send it in with a simple forms. The officer refuses it. I haven't seen any tax documents.
I want to just suggest that there's people listening to this show who are permanent residents who are thinking of traveling and are like turning the radio up and like, what? I didn't know all of this. So because they would not be aware, maybe they haven't traveled for a long period.
No, this is if you were a permanent resident, this becomes very well known to you very quickly.
All right, and maybe they're learning that now. So the advice is in our final minute or so here at MKS professionals. What's your advice?
I would say come see if you have a PR card that's expired or expiring. I would really hesitate in terms of applying on your own. I think you really should look at coming and see a professional because there are exemptions that will speed up. There is some urgent processing for people that have travel booked and can justify a reason why it should be done faster. So you might get it processed in 6 weeks if you can justify it as opposed to waiting the 6 months. And you don't want to make a mistake on those forms because if you do, then you're in the 18-month pile in terms of waiting.
And there are workarounds, at least until the ETA came around. There are workarounds. Mm-hmm. And there may be some solutions, but you need to plan your trip according to that.
Right. That's fascinating. I had no idea. And so if you're a permanent resident and you need that permanent resident card and you need to travel, it's better to ask the questions before than you get on the airplane.
Absolutely.
All right. Gordon Maynard and Rudy Kischer, thank you so much from MKS, downtown Vancouver in Yaletown. They're specialists in immigration and citizenship. So thank you very much for being on the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650. I'm Zach Spencer. We'll have our guests back soon.